but also, I'm exhilarated because so many of the presentations I thought were so excellent. So, and then to meet up with those guys too. They're part of my, Kurt Vonnegut in Slaughterhouse-Five. Remember, he talked about people who show up, a group of people who constantly show up and are his mainstay, so to speak. And he called it a caress. So like you guys, they're part of my caress.
Caress.
Oh, very good.
Embrace.
That's a neat word to you. That's a neat use of that word, isn't it? A caress. That's cool. Yeah.
Yeah. Did anybody watch them?
Sure.
Did you all? I quite frankly was not able to, time-wise for me, but I do want to download them and watch at least most of them.
I have the same plan, but I was fascinated by the critical realism discussion.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
That's you get high marks for that, Johnny.
He's a very bright, he was a student of yours, yes?
Yes.
Right? Well-researched fellow.
Yeah, really, really. They are.
And so, Fred, I have a favor to ask of you. Sure. And it may be that we do it at a different time, just you and me. But given that I have been away from the kind of study that you guys have all stayed consumed with, I'd like to kind of get an understanding of why you would have a seminar on Lonergan. I understand that he was a brilliant guy, did a lot of writing and all that, but if you could at some point, and I don't know if today it's up to Johnny and Tom, I don't have any basis for putting him in
and Frank and George
and some frame of mind,
Yeah.
And so I don't know if that's a fair question to ask.
No, it's absolutely fair. And I'd be happy to do it in any context.
Okay.
Let's at least first say hi to Frank and George. And George didn't think that he would be able to be with us.
But here I am. And
there you are.
And you could fill me in on what you're talking about.
And George Crook.
It's pretty serious.
Hi, George.
We're not talking about too much of anything except debriefing the Lonergan conference a little bit.
Oh, good. Yeah.
And Tim was asking for a little bit of background on Lonergan and perhaps why we are interested. I mean, it's pretty obvious. Lonergan has been a passion and the lifetime commitment for Fred. And I think that it was actually George Ferrick who kind of got us into, way back when, a Lonergan interest in our group.
That was before Tim joined us. So
yeah.
Right. Yeah. Before Tim joined us. Actually, before you joined us, too, because I think it was at George's
oh, good.
request that we invited you as a guest.
Thanks, Fred, through Bernard.
Hey, thank you.
And so it's Ferrick's fault.
Yeah, I'm I wouldn't probably be here wearing what I'm wearing if it went for Lonergan. Lonergan led to.
Well, that's just what you need, Tim, to be more worried.
Yeah. How true. Yeah. Okay.
No, it was a real, I depict a lot of education, Tim, that we had at the seminary is a truck driving up to the landing dock. We're on the other side and it unloads boxes and we put them into our brains. That was a philosophy course. But Lonergan said, well, let's look inside of us and see how we go about thinking and making decisions. And he gave examples of like the Eureka discovery experience and other things from common sense and science, and to help a person see the operations that are going on, maybe unconsciously or that we're unaware of, and become conscious of them. Fred, you can
Okay,
add to it, but yeah.
But
And I didn't.
But Jordan, let me ask you this though. But isn't Lonergan thought to be, not thought to be, I mean, don't you describe him as a theologian? And so in my naive manner, I always thought theologians were like Aquinas. I mean, they studied the nature of God and that kind. And remember, I'm speaking in a naive, uneducated manner, and so the kinds of things, Ferric, you're just talking about, I don't know how they relate. I don't see how they relate to my immature concept of what theologians talk about. That's where my obstacle is right now.
Yeah, well, I think maybe in the conversation we can get around to that. But I know, Fred, there was a marvelous little conversation you had with the fellow who lives in Southern California, who's talking about, is he an electrician, or he was talking about, I don't know the individual, but he's introduced Lonergan into teaching young people that he's training to be electricians, and he's using Lonerganian concepts to convey to them the framework for thinking about it. Is that correct, Fred?
Yes, it is. So Andres Ancona is a Mexican who lives in Los Angeles because he thinks that the President Obrador, or whatever his name is just ruining Mexico. And he couldn't stand it, so he left his place in Mexico and his chance of teaching engineering there, and came to the States. And he had the wonderful experience at the Jesuit University in Mexico City of having one of the students of Einstein as his teacher in
Wow.
He told a story a long time ago about how that teacher gave them a problem, gave a small group of students the problem out of the total group, and they all worked on it and worked on it. And finally, on Ancona, Daniel, he figured it out. And in a certain sense, that teacher was just amazed. But it wasn't so amazing for Daniel, because his older brother, who was a seminarian in Rome at our time from Mexico, had studied Lonergan because he had him at the Greg too, like I did. And so he introduced that to his brother, and his brother realized that what George was describing as the way we were standardly taught was really a matter of basically memory. You could understand what you could understand, but mainly you had to get all the answers so that you could repeat them back on the oral exams and so forth.
Get the proof texts.
Yeah, right. So it's completely extrinsic. And one of the blessings of this group for me is that all of you already, whether you know Lonergan or not, are deep questioners. No one asks questions as much as Tim.
Thank you.
Which is good.
You're the superb Lonerganite, Tim.
Pretend that we know.
So in other words, what the key to Lonergan is appropriating the structures of your own consciousness if you follow them in a way that isn't socialized and acculturated into not follow them, which is what our cultures tend to do to us. They failed in your respect, Tim, and
They sure did.
all of your others. So what Lonergan would really be about is becoming explicitly aware of the dynamics of your spontaneous human consciousness, which you'd have a head start on because you are a self-transcendent person and you're very smart. In other words, the key thing that most people don't realize is that questions occur to you. You sit in these talks every week and you realize that something we're talking about has raised a question for you. The question comes out of nowhere. It occurs to you. You don't make it happen. But when you have a question, then you have the possibility of getting an understanding, and it too comes out of nowhere. But it can't come out if you don't have the question. So what George was talking about is the most boring thing in education is having someone tell you answers to questions that you never had.
Yes.
And what's clear about all of you guys is, although you may have gone through a system like that, you had your own questions, and you went ahead and worked at answering them. And it's so clear that you've operated in what Lonergan would call a self-transcendent way in terms of inquiry, understanding, judging evidence, being careful about judging evidence. For example, when we talked about abortion, realizing how much we didn't know, how many further questions still have to be answered, but we can't answer them because we don't necessarily have all that we need to answer, the information or the data. And then being responsible, which means being able to deliberate.
Fred, could I jump in just to add a little concrete example that Tim will, I think, reverberate to? And Frank,
Great.
remember. So number one, do you remember a talk by Father Keneally? He was the rector of the seminary in LA. And at one of the talks, and I never forgot this, he talked about developing discipline. And he suggested getting a goose down pillow or something and throw it up in the air and let all the feathers out and then pick them up one by one, that would be developing discipline and obedience. Flash forward to Rome. Remember, Frank, how we had these big hallways of our rooms, and down at each end would be, the showers and the bathrooms and so forth. And if I recall correctly, it was a rule at the Greg, and Fred, you may be able to know more about this. You were supposed to put your cassock on every time you went down to the bathroom.
Oh my.
My gosh.
You remember that?
Yeah, I do remember it. Not that I ever followed it.
Yeah, okay. Well, let me tell you, the thinking process, Tim, would be, the question comes up, why should I put my cassock on to go down to the bathroom? What's the value? To me, obedience should have a value at the end of it. So I thought, what's the value of doing that? And I couldn't come up with one, so I just didn't do it. I never did that, to the extent that I probably maybe even forget that it was a rule, because, and there was also some other rules like that. So I said there should be a value at the end of a promulgation. For example, like family planning, the value should be have the family you think you can handle and that God wants you to have, not just go ahead and have sex and try to have rhythm and whatever comes, et cetera, et cetera. So what's the value behind something to obey? So there should be some value there. Anyway, that's my little concrete example of a question that I came up with. What's the value of this? Yeah, and then that leads to thinking about it. And
Yeah.
so it's just a small example.
It'll last all morning, though. May I call you this afternoon? Okay, I'll do that.
So Fred, I hand the microphone over to the representative. from the Lonergan
You've been
Conference, the
watching.
Honorable
That was
Fred
a,
Lawrence.
that was a great example. I remember in our seminary, the junior seminary, we had a big study hall. And the
Yes.
rule was one of many of the 20 rules we had to keep. The rule was we had to be silent in there. And I remember Father McNeil, I don't know whether you remember him. Father,
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Old timer.
yeah, he said, well, when he was a seminary rector, he started off in the seminary, it was a new seminary. He started off in the seminary with no rules. And what he really said was, and this is really, I think, so beautiful. He said, the students made the rules. If you could talk all the time in the study hall, it would mess up other people's being able to study when they wanted to study. So you need to have silence. And of course, there wasn't strict silence. People talked in the thing, but there were long periods in which people really were working, say, preparing for exams and so forth, in which they were silent. And I think that idea of rules and laws as being constitutive of a way of life, and I thought all my life how grateful I am for all the silence that I experienced, the need to be silent, how much it gave me in terms of time to study, ask and answer questions that I might not have done because I would love to tell jokes and chat all the time too. So that would be an example of rules that are not just rules, but they arise in terms of a rationale that has to do with caring for the community in a way that the community may not altogether understand, but it really is in the name of the community that such a law was made. So that was one of the gifts of my seminary education, to have a teacher like Father McNeil teach me Greek. And
Okay, I was trying to put a face to it. So he was our Greek teacher in freshman year of college. Am I right, Crook?
Yes,
Was he
No.
also the algebra? Was he the geometry teacher?
yeah,
he was. He was our geometry teacher.
Geometry, yeah.
I remember he could take a piece
And
of
Greek.
chalk on a string, and he was amazing what he could draw on the chalkboard. He could draw these. Oh, it was just amazing. Yeah. So that's McNeil. That was his name.
yeah.
Okay.
He was a good guy.
Was he?
I was just
I thought
struck by George's comment about Father Keneally. It seemed like he equated discipline with obedience, whereas Father McNeil seems to have separated them. Good distinction. I think you're right.
That's
I was in this forum, but recently I had this thought thrown at me from some source that how
Lonergan.
ironic it is that for religious life in the Roman Catholic Church, obedience became so much the hallmark or the touchstone, and there's nothing about it in the scriptures. I mean, it's just you never see any scriptural enthusiasm about the virtue of obedience. Maybe obedience to God would come up, I suppose, but it's just evolved among religious orders and seminaries in the Catholic Church.
Have any of you seen The Nun Story? It came out years ago. It was with Audrey Hepburn, but I happened to be reading a book by Catherine Holm, who is the author of it. Very interesting woman, and she wrote it because she met a Belgian nun who left the convent, and she was a nurse, this Belgian nun, and she was sent to the Congo, and after coming back, but the depiction of spiritual life in a convent that is in a nun story is just absolutely amazing. You know, the idea would be that whenever a bell would ring, you'd drop whatever you were doing immediately, because that was like Christ's call to move on to the next thing. In a certain sense, that could be very meaningful. But later on, as a nun, she would be in a Congo talking to some patient and having some meaningful conversation when the bell would go off, and she didn't go back right away. She'd finish her conversation with the person in need, and then she would feel guilty, like, oh, I'm just not perfect. I just, she was in conflict. Anyway, the depiction, and I'm reading another book about monks, and they have this thing called a copa. You had to keep a little book and put all your faults in it. And then once a week they would have a public, and everybody gathered. You'd have to recite what you did wrong. And in the convent, it was added on, at least in the nun story, that other nuns could report on you if they saw you do something like talking to another nun that was out of line. They would report on that. So you'd have to do your copa, and you'd have to prostrate yourself there on the convent, the chapel floor with your arms out and so forth for so much time. But it kind of fits in. Yeah, it's a very, I guess if you want to develop shock troops, you would do that type of thing, or, but it's very interesting, the whole thing of obedience that you bring up, Frank.
Well, I mean, I don't know how we got here from there, because my understanding is that the primary insight about obedience was introduced into religious life by Saint Benedict.
Mm-hmm.
And that for him, obedience meant deep listening.
Right.
Which is closer to self-discipline than it is to,
external rules and stuff.
Roma locuta est, res finita est.
Yeah.
So
weren't we told that the bell was the voice of God?
Yeah, probably.
We were.
Weren't we? I think I remember that.
I think Father Lee used to tell us that. That it's either the voice of God or his voice, one or the other.
Take your pick. But
They're interchangeable.
Well, I know Trump has been acting like his voice was the voice of God. It sounds like, I get.
Yeah.
And
well, what about the Speaker of the Arizona House saying that the Constitution was divinely inspired?
Yeah, I was kind of surprised by that.
That was a surprise.
I mean, the guy's a very honorable man, obviously, but
yep.
That was very, and Liz Cheney repeated it.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I was surprised by that, but I guess if you believe in Angel Maroney and other types of things, you would, ascribe divinely inspired to many different sources. Yeah.
Well, when Frank talked about deep listening,
yeah,
that would involve, in a certain sense, responding to the Holy Spirit.
Right.
And then in answer to, in relation to what George said about obedience, the key to that is it's okay to be obedient. It's important to be obedient in the case of Benedict. But the fundamental thing is you need to be taught what Augustine told us, which was love God and do what you will. That's the key. There wasn't too much talk about love. And I remember hearing a talk from one of our something or others in the seminary who talked about cultivating affability, but you didn't hear much talk about love and the centrality of love in the Gospels. And so the bureaucratic ethos encourages obedience to rules, but it doesn't cultivate the most important thing, which is love. But what's true is, so guys like you and me, we went to the seminary not because we wanted to be part of some big institution or something, but at least in my case, I admire priests who were so
Mhm.
self-transcendent and so kind and so good. And I thought, gee, that's what I would like to be like. And so you would have a certain core of people in the seminary who would be like-minded. And luckily, for having friends in the seminary, which didn't have anything to do with obedience, really did help you become something like what you hope to become. That was my experience.
Fred, that makes me happy. When my first evaluation as a young seminarian in the minor seminary had the phrase seeds of intractability.
Okay, that would be a good
To
book.
this very day, right?
But you know, it's very interesting though, because I remember the night before we were ordained, Bishop Ray, who ordained us, gave us a talk, and I was scandalized when he said that someone had told him, when a young priest in New York, that the best advice was keep your mouth shut and your bowels open.
Oh my. Oh
When did
my.
he, Frank, when did he say
On the
that?
evening of our ordination, he said that to us.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Oh, was that the
I don't
talk?
get it.
Was that the talk before
The night
we,
before we were ordained.
really?
He
I
met
don't
with-
understand what it means.
I don't either. Thank you, Crook, for asking. I don't know what he was trying to get at. That
Yeah,
stupid
Frank, what was?
statement. Help us
I'm
out,
obviously
Frank.
trying to make a
Well,
joke.
I took it to be exactly what Fred is saying is, you know, find your place in the bureaucracy and hide yourself rather than being open and vulnerable to love.
Okay. Pretty stupid statement. That's what I think. But anyways, he's
So
a
what-
bishop, so yeah.
Pardon me, Tim. Go ahead.
It's not. It's less than edifying.
Well, one of the issues with that whole structure of things is that everything was based on will and willpower.
Yeah.
So you had to conform your will to the rules and shut up or fake it one way or the other.
As
And-
we all did at some extent.
And one of the things that Lonergan brings out is that Thomas Aquinas, in fact, did talk about the will as a rational appetite. So it responds to the instructions that your understanding and judgment give you. But Lonergan realized that the problem with Thomas Aquinas's analysis, and in a way it betrayed Thomas's own best instincts, was that he used this metaphysical terminology about faculties, intellect, will, so forth and so on. And that was something he realized as his life went on, and he used those same terms in his great work, Insight, that was wrong. That really what's true is that what you have the pure and unrestricted desire to know by nature. But the way the pure and unrestricted desire to know, it really has to do with your orientation towards God, your desire to know everything about everything. And that gets you into not just knowing, but loving. And so the dynamism of conscious intentionality is really driven in the long run by love. And that's why conversion is so important. If your love life is screwed up, you need to be converted. And you don't convert yourself, you're converted by God. And it's a gift. And it's often mediated by looking up to people who are already converted and letting them befriend you and help you realize why you look up to them. And so you had that awful thing in the seminaries of no particular friendships. Well, what the
Yes.
hell what kind of friendships are there?
Fred,
Generic.
Fred, could you unpack a little bit just exactly what is in the back of your mind when you use the word love? Because I think a problem is everybody talks about love, but I suspect that if pulled out, we would all describe and define it in its basic terms a bit differently.
Thanks, Tom. That's a great question.
Because,
Thank you.
you know, Bishop
Go ahead,
Barron,
Frank.
Bishop
Frank, you-
Barron so very often, echoes Thomas Aquinas's definition of love as willing the good of the other as other. Then you've got that will word in there.
Yeah, valet doesn't really mean will.
Yeah,
It means wish.
yeah. So,
Wishing the good for the other. So it's not the same as willing it.
but a wish is also a rather wishy-washy word. It doesn't necessarily influence what you're going to do about it.
well,
So, but I'm asking,
no,
can you get behind? Talk a little bit about what's in your mind when you use the word love.
well, you often hear the phrase, be careful what you wish for. Because what you wish for is what Aristotle called that for the sake of which you choose and do everything you do. And whatever that for the sake of which you choose and do everything you do turns out to be your God. And so wishing isn't wishy-washy. Wishing leads to the question, what should I do? Should I do it? And that demands what I call deliberation, which is a matter of discernment, which is a matter of deliberating and evaluating. And deliberating has to do with choosing a course of action among alternative possible courses of action that's in line with your that for the sake of which. And once you do that, you have a kind of thing that, okay, here's the real situation, and here's really what I'm going to do. And I'm not faking myself out about what the real situation is, but this is the most intelligent and reasonable course of action. But nothing's going to happen without evaluation. And evaluation is a matter of the fact that our feelings are responses to values. So our feelings as responsible to values, in a certain sense, are running the show. And if your feelings are all screwed up, then your choice, your deliberation is really not going to be very helpful, because chances are it's going to turn out to be calculation, which is going to really be framed in terms of the question, what's in this for me? When you get out of what's in this for me to what is the right thing to do, what is the loving thing to do, what is the self-transcendent or self-sacrificial thing to do, then everything changes. But you don't really spontaneously do that if you're brought up as a self-centered little kid who's just going to spend his life being on the make, or her life being on the make. So you need the help of genuine friends, and the most genuine friendship of all is the friendship of Christ, who lived and lived his life and taught us what he taught us, and died for the sake of us, not as a form of suffering for us in place of us, penal substitution. That's bullshit. But I mean, that supposes that God's going to kill his own son, so everybody's left off the hook. That doesn't make any intelligible sense. So it's a gesture of love. So one of the lovely things about Catholicism is that they have the crucifix, not a bare cross, but the cross with the corpus, the body of Christ on it. And we have that chance to realize, well, what an extraordinary gesture of love this was for us. And we think about the fact of what the excruciating suffering of Christ must have been. And we realize that if we realize it's a friendly thing for us, the best kind of friendship we could ever have, then Aristotle says a wonderful thing about friendship, that a friend is half your soul. So you would be able to sympathize, or rather empathize, with the sufferings of Christ and realize, oh, what a friend we have in Jesus. And that's the key thing. It displaces yourself from the center of the universe towards what is the center of the universe, which has to do with God's love and the gift of God's love caused by the sending of the Son to be a human being and living the life that's taken, broken, given away, as Augustine put it, and given away for us. And that I was so impressed by a sermon that I got to hear that Tom gave about Jesus's statement after the washing of the feet in the long discourse in John. Love one another as I have loved you. And also the phrase that's important is do this in memory of me. Our memory.
I'm glad you caught yourself between the sympathy and the empathy, which I think is right there with what you're saying now.
Well, someone in this group taught me, watch out for sympathy. It's not. So being in this group is a learning experience for me. And I'm so grateful for it. But at any rate, so wish is not so wishy-washy. It's true, that's the way it turns out in some people's discourse. But really it has to do with your overall orientation to that for the sake of which you choose and do everything you do, which is your God.
Yeah, to me, the problem really is that when we're defining some of these terms, and love is one of them, wish, as you're saying it, is another. I would add, getting into my own bailiwick, symbol is another, that when we use those words, they are unintelligible to the vast majority of people who are not specialists, simply because of things like when you wish upon a star, and all that shit, which isn't really shit, but it's it conveys a wishy-washy notion of that word. And similarly, the use of love is all over the place.
Let me add something to that too, because if Fred, if you said to the certain people in Congress, I can't remember those two women who carry R-14s to their patriotic campaigns and so forth, but if you said to them, love God and do what you will, they would. That's what some of the people were doing on January the 6th. They were good Christians loving God and taking and breaking into the Capitol, and we're going to kill people. So that's what. But some were actually doing it motivated by their Christian belief, don't you think, Tom?
I think so. I think they sincerely believe that they are doing God's will by getting rid of these anti-God people.
Let me share with you. We were in a very remote area of northern Georgia last week camping, and so they're having primaries in Georgia, and so we're driving around, and are these campaign signs, and so there's this Republican congressman, not Marjorie Taylor Greene, but another guy, and so all of his campaign posters have a symbol of an AR-15 and a cross. That's his campaign poster. You know, God and guns, and that is all over the place down here. And
I
think they do feel
that he sent.
You get that cartoon I sent you today, Tom?
Yeah, I did, and I sent it out in my last email to all of you.
Yeah.
So Tim, how did you feel about that?
I was glad I didn't live in that district, but
Yeah.
but he probably will be overwhelmingly elected. And there was a great article, maybe I sent it on to you, Tom, I don't know, that was about the evangelical movement and how they have embraced the gun lobby, and it's just kind of.
So it was in the Atlantic Monthly?
Maybe, yeah, maybe.
Yeah, I think so.
I get so much crap that I don't even know where it comes from. And it's an interesting thing that's happening in America is that the idea, we're talking about love, and what that means is love is no longer part of any conversation, among politicians. It just is not. It is usually protect my rights. It's me. It's what do I do to protect my family? I saw an interview with a guy who's running for Congress in Texas who is teaching his young children how to use weapons. And I was sharing this with a couple of Cursil friends yesterday because we meet on Thursday afternoon. I said, I'm glad I'm almost 80 because I can't imagine what this place is going to look like in 20 years from now. So anyway, that's a neither here nor there kind of thing, except that, as Ferrick was saying, is a lot of people have been able to pull God out of the hat and wrap themselves in, like the comment that the Constitution was divinely inspired. Only someone who's never read the Federalist Papers could say that thing. I mean, that's just stupid.
Well, he's never gone to Philadelphia and gone to the place where they worked it out and heard about all the arguing that went on and all the.
Oh yeah.
Well, this guy, Frank, didn't you think he was an interesting guy though?
Very much.
He was clearly a Mormon. I mean, from the first 2 minutes he was testifying, one knew he was a Mormon because he had this sort of Mormon, practical theology, high patriotism or strong patriotism, self-reliance. He was tall, and he was the speaker of the Assembly of the state of Arizona.
Right.
And
he looked like he never drank coffee.
Right. And just a straight arrow, and he described how he was telling me, what's his name, Giuliani, especially, and Trump. But this is my faith,
right.
And if you want me to say something that's not true, and I've sworn my loyalty to the Constitution, then where would I be? Who would I? I'd be nothing. It was like A Man for All Seasons, that passage about, water flowing through your hands if you violate an oath. It was kind of eloquent. And he's the Speaker of the Assembly. Okay. Next day, first thing in the morning, I see a story somewhere. This guy was a dynamite witness, really helped the anti-Trump cause. But minor detail, he said after his testimony that if he had to vote again, he'd vote for Trump still. He would vote for Trump, certainly against Biden.
Well, that seems very inconsistent. Yeah.
Oh, but
Okay.
It's not, though, because he sees it as Biden is slithering into the Garden of Eden with all this progressive bad stuff.
Yeah, but what is Trump bringing into the garden? He's
safeguarding.
And he was even subject to what Trump was bringing, and his family was threatened, and he's still threatened. And he would still vote for the guy behind it.
Was dying.
There's some disconnect in his brain. He should just not vote for anybody. That's what I would do if I were in his position. I'd say I can't vote for Biden. I can't vote for Trump. That guy is evil. Why would he not vote for Biden and vote for Trump? Isn't it more overtly evil what Trump did?
it has.
Isn't the whole campaign from the right that Biden is weak, and weak is not acceptable? Strong over weak. Isn't that their argument, George?
Well, yeah, but it's also that he's a conscious sellout, of his Catholic principles. I just got a text from Chavira saying, yes, he is going to participate in our meeting. Did I get his text to relay to others? No, but anyway.
I got it too. I got it. Yeah.
Oh, I didn't. But anyway, they see Biden, the whole same-sex marriage, sexual switching from one gender to the other, and that's worse than Trump to them.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
One thing, George Farrick, I think that you're slipping back into the polarizing dualism, that it really has to be one or the other. If you're weighing values, Trump may be an absolutely terrible person, but if you take the whole context of, let's say, the Republican Party behind them, they're the values that we want to uphold, is what they're saying, and we'll put up with Trump. Whereas the values of the Democratic Party, they will say, are leading us down a primrose path to perdition. Now, it's not even that clear black and white, but I do think you've got, there are many colors of gray in between those black and whites. And so, I think it's not really productive for you to say, or any of us to say, well, I just can't see how anybody would vote for that person. That's sort of like voting for expecting that person to control all of reality.
Do you think Pence would vote for Trump?
I don't know whether Pence would vote for Trump or not. I think that's really irrelevant, because what we're talking about here are the values behind people's position, other than those particular two people.
Reminds me of the same contrast between Coeur d'Leone and Pope Francis.
Yeah, or Burke and Pope Francis. And
Yeah,
I think it is a good exercise for us to at least try to look with some kind of sympathy or understanding at what might be the particular values that are motivating them, and to see if there's anything positive in those values that maybe we also need to learn from.
Yeah, I see, Tom, I do see those values, but I do not see many values in the person, the subject of Trump. I don't
Right.
see him, I could see it better in Romney, or I could see it better in that fellow right there if he were running for president. But I do not see Trump as a morally
Fine.
converted
But
person to express it.
But Romney was not. Um, uh, Romney was not a possibility for the candidate. There were only two possibilities in the.
No, but I mean, you can't jump over the person Trump and just
True.
say he represents. So that's what I'm getting at. How could somebody who, say, well, I don't care who it is, because Trump doesn't, what he expresses in his values are not the same as they think that they're for. He's not doing stuff for the poor white person
George, what
in
you are,
jobs.
but so George, what you are advocating is that a vast majority of people of the United States do not exercise their right to vote.
No, they can go ahead and vote. I'm just saying I'm surprised that somebody like Bowers would say, but I would vote for Trump again. To me, there's
So
a
did Bill
disconnect.
Barr.
There's a
So did Bill
disconnect. Yeah,
Barr.
right. There's
Yeah,
kind of
so
a,
would Barr.
and Barr said he was full of bullshit and so forth. And I can't see how they would do that. Put our country in the hands of somebody who already showed how ineptitude and crooked he is.
And so in the rest of the interview with Bill Barr, he said, yes, I would vote for him, because he said, I cannot conceive of voting for any Democrat. So I don't think that, I think, okay, my Republican neighbor, very conservative, very strong Catholic, led on to me that he feels that Biden would be a lot more popular with conservative Catholics, and maybe even with some of the right wing, if he had been opposed to loosening, or had been opposed to abortion. If he had been on what Sean thinks is the right side of abortion, the right side of gender affirming, things like that. And so I don't know. My sense is, just talking to people who are strong Trumpers, who are Catholics, I don't know that they are happy with Trump. They're just extremely unhappy with Biden. And I think that if the Republicans put up, DeSantis or Cruz or something like that, they would be much happier, because they know Trump is a scumbag. I think they really believe that. But that Biden, here you have someone who professes to be, he is a Catholic, but what he proposes and what he talks about are things that these conservative Catholics just find repugnant.
Well, I
And
think
so I think they would. I think if it was Biden, Trump again, I think a lot of these conservative Catholics would vote for Trump and hold their nose. Because but that's just what I'm hearing from Trumpites that are friends of mine, and most of my friends voted for him.
Going back to that poster you saw in Georgia.
Yeah.
That's a case of what in Latin would be called the corruptio optimi pessima.
I translate.
What is the corruption of what is best is worst. And that's what that kind of Christianity really is. And with regard to the overall that Tom was bringing up about wishy-washy love, is another case of that. And what we need to really confront is what the Gospel of John calls the sin of the world, and what Lonergan calls the second component in history. The first is progress, the second is decline, and the third is redemption. And so the sin of the world really has to do with an objective surge that people are socialized and acculturated into bad things. And they don't do that because they necessarily have bad hearts, although that sometimes occurs. Rather, it seems to me that there's the problem, and here's where knowledge comes in so clearly, that the dialogues of the Platonic dialogues about Socrates, when he's interviewing people, he brings out a law of dialectics. Dialectics has to do with disputes between different sides. And what he said is that what becomes clear from Socrates' life, this is Plato, that when he's talking to someone who's a man of the street or a country bumpkin, they treat him as a sophist. And when he confronts sophists like Protagoras or Gorgias, whoever, they treat him like a country bumpkin or a man of the street. And so the idea is that if you're in a counterposition, not really straight on the ball, you're in an unintelligible position, you tend to regard a person who's in the middle as the opposite counterposition. So, for example, one of the big problems that we're talking about when we're talking about that guy saying those people who understand that Trump is a shithead, they also think for important reasons that people who are interested in social justice are also radical socialists, which they're not necessarily. There's a great difficulty of understanding the intelligibility of the economy, but not all those people interested in social justice are socialists. They keep labeling all the Democrats, especially the so-called radical Democrats, but they lump everything together. That Biden is not, he's interested in social justice. He may not understand the right way to do things, but he's not a socialist in the strict sense of the word. On the other hand, the people on the side of being interested in social justice who don't really understand exactly the difference between themselves and socialists will tend to regard the people on the right as the spawn of the devil from the other angle. You see what I'm trying to say? So that anybody who's in the center gets left out. Of course, being in the center is pretty hard because of the objective surge into which people are socialized and acculturated, which means unintelligibility, that they have plans and ideas, which was very well illustrated by Tim's example of that poster in Georgia, that they don't necessarily, it's not because they have bad will, it's because, as somebody said, this is the way they've been thinking that you really do love God and hate those other people. Well, as soon as you say and hate those other people or be willing to shoot those other people, you're forgetting utterly what Jesus says about people who are on the opposite side from you, that you need to love them. You need people who treat you despitefully. You have to forgive them and love them and overcome evil with good. And that's a hell of a challenge, of course. But this thing of this is based on American individualism and voluntarism, so that either side can be caught up in what in the real meaning of conspiracy. They have all the memes and so forth that they adopt, and they know that these memes are contradict the other memes on the other side, but they have a solidarity with people who agree with them and forget what the real meanings, as Tim pointed out, of the Federalist Papers. So in other words, they are what Madison called factions. And this is really a very hard thing to overcome. And really the idea of overcoming these things. So Madison said in the 10th Federalist and the 50th Federalist, you can't get rid of factions. They're based on people's solid will, the will one side or the other. But you can't get rid of them. All you can do is moderate them. That's the idea of a large democratic republic in which different people in different sections of the country have different interests and therefore have to somehow modify their own interests for the good of the whole. Good luck with that. So
Yeah.
it's a tremendous problem, and it's based on voluntarism, your will, and the things you've been deciding to will, partly out of solidarity with people who are considered by you to be like-minded. And in a certain sense, that's what we all are, except I hope it's a Christian consensus rather than a haywire consensus. I think all of us tend to think in terms of the gospel and the gospel values.
And there you go with love one another as I have loved you. And what I feel the campaigns are treating love as a weakness as opposed to a strength.
That's true.
I wonder, Tim, you have close friends, people with whom you pray, and do good deeds, who are very strong and ardent Trump supporters, right?
Yes.
Okay. Now, my question to George is, George, could you be friends with these same people? Could you tolerate them? Could you walk with them across the street, to have a drink?
Yeah, I think I could, and I would like to engage in conversation with them. Yeah.
I think
Well,
Tim,
okay, so here is the, but we cannot talk about Trump, okay? Whenever we do, it gets pretty fiery. And so the friendships that are based on our love for each other and our love for the church and are probably kept alive because we've found so much other common ground. Because when Trump was running, I mean, we almost broke up as a group of guys in Curcia. We almost broke up because out of the 8 of us, there were 6 Trump. No, there were 5 Trumpites, at least vocal ones, and there were 2 of us who were anti-Trump, and 1 person we don't know. We almost the group almost came apart. It almost came apart because we could not understand anything about the other person's position. Could not.
Tim,
And so
let me
we-
ask a question about your Curcio group, and that is, what is it about that Curcio that gave you the common ground to stay together?
We're all members of the same parish, okay, and so we can bitch and moan and complain about the new priest, so that's a common ground. I think the other is that we truly like each other. We like each other. I mean, these are guys afterwards we go get beer and hamburgers, and so we've made the decision, Johnny, that we can't talk about politics, but we can talk about our families, we can talk about our parish, we can talk about the gospel, we can talk about the Bible studies that we're doing and things like that. And I sometimes wonder, well, have I copped out? Have I taken the easy route out and not really kind of tried to understand what these guys think? How could they even today say that if it was Biden and Trump, they would still vote for Trump? And they've said that. And I don't understand it, but I don't think that I ever will. But I don't want to lose the friendships. And so I don't know if that's what Fred would call love. I mean, I don't know what word to put on it.
Well, it sounds like that's love. Yeah.
But
It's difficult love.
What
Yeah,
I think,
but look what Trump's done to you guys.
I
I mean,
think-
I think I could get along with Trump supporters. I get along with one half of one. But I think I could, but
You need to go whole hog here, George.
yeah. Well, I just take what I've sent. I don't meet a lot of those in Southern California, but Tim, and these friendships, which are deep and loving and long. Here, you've taken a major topic of life off the table. You've had to.
Yes. Yeah.
And that is an outrage.
No, it's not.
Yeah, it is. And it's Trump's fault, as far as I'm concerned. And I would, if I were in the group, I would agree to take it off the table. I mean, but it cripples the friendship.
I don't think
Tim,
it does, George. I don't think it does. I think what happens in these conversations about politics is that you have people, and I'll use me, I've got a PhD in political science, so do I know a lot about it? And then you've got guys who, didn't finish college and they maybe took one political science or history class, and their idea about politics is very visceral. It's very, and is media dominated up here. And so I don't think, George, that, and I have another friend, fallen away Catholic, who agrees with me on everything politically, but it gets tiring to the friendship because that's all Rick wants to talk about is the corruption of the Republican Party. And so I'm okay, Crook, I really am okay to have some zones of friends where I know we're not going to talk politics. And I've got friends that we will talk politics. And so I don't agree that it is a detriment to the friendship. I just don't know that with every friend, I need to be able to talk about everything. Does that make any sense?
Well, it does, but I want to return to my question. Curcio is supposed to be journey. Where the hell is this journey going?
I think it's been.
Well, there are forks in the road on a journey of sorts. But Tim, let me ask you a question. The 5 Trumpites, what do they think about Pope Francis? Or do you know?
No, I do know. And fortunately, even though these guys would vote for Trump again and again, they love Francis.
Do they? Okay.
Absolutely, yeah. And so
Uh-huh.
I think, okay, so where is my is it red line or something? Where is, if they were critical of Francis, like many priests in this region are, I think I would move to another. I would move to another group. I would, because yeah, there are certain, but fortunately, these guys surprise, and then you may be. I mean, they are kind. They witness to the gospel. They are charitable. They volunteer all over the place. So they're not like just Sunday mass going. They're not just Sunday. You know, they're really kind of kind, wonderful, warm guys. It's just they don't see politics. They don't see the running of the country in the same way I do.
Yeah, but they don't realize that Trump would do not one of the things that you described they do.
I understand.
I
understand.
You see?
No, Farrick, I get that. I mean, I get that.
Yeah.
What I would like to say is that the last presentation at the Lonergan workshop was by a person who uses Lonergan in conflict resolution. And she said, usually when you have that kind of a stance that you're at odds, you're at loggerheads with your friends on the political issues, the reason why the people that are you can see are so good is that they feel threatened by the other way of thinking, and somehow or other there's a need to kind of cool the mark or take the threat seriously and try to understand what it is that makes them so uncomfortable in such a way that they would, even knowing that Trump is an awful person, they feel like they'd have to support Trump in order to relieve the kind of threat that they think the other side poses. And so I think it's not outrageous that you do what you do. In fact, I find it very loving. But at the same time, it would be interesting if you could let them talk about why they would do that, and sympathize with their problem. Chances are it has to do with the misunderstanding of economics. So in other words, they're thinking that the Biden position is drifting towards radical socialism. And they know that's wrong because they know socialism is wrong, but they have a wrong understanding of how a capitalist economy really has to work. And they keep thinking, well, it's true that Trump didn't do anything about the people who own 66% of the nation's wealth to alleviate the people who are left out. But they still believe, for example, that a high sea lifts all boats.
Mm-hmm.
The market really does tell you what has to be done in terms of the intelligibility of the market as they understand it. And they think Biden won't pay attention to that and doesn't pay attention to that, not to the extreme degree, but he's leading towards not paying attention to that at all. So that you'd have socialists killing the hen that lays the golden eggs in order to help the poor. And that would be, from their point of view, that wouldn't really help the poor and so forth. Do you see what I'm trying to say, Tim?
I do. However, you if you knew me better, you would know I'm not the right kind of guy to be able. It's just, I wish I had a temperament and a personality that would allow me to ask that kind of question of my friends, but I'm too judgmental, and I would be argumentative with them rather than listening. And so sadly, sadly, just be totally honest with you guys, I'd love to ask them, well, what is it that you hated about Biden? And because I think what would happen is I couldn't keep my mouth shut. You know, you're full of shit. How can you believe that? You know, that kind of stuff. And so I think that I would
Yeah, I
not
get
be
you,
a
Tim.
good.
But you
Yeah,
can't,
I hope you. Yeah,
I want to affirm your stance and who you are.
oh, but you
Yeah.
can pray for them.
You have to bring Fred along with you to lunch. Let him do the dirty work.
The lovely part of the
I'm not sure I'd
country,
be so
Fred.
brave either.
Fred, what did you just say a little bit ago?
Well, I think you're treating them with love and with a real sense of your incapacities to really carry on a different kind of conversation. But it's not that you sincerely do love these guys as your fellow Christians and Cursillo members. But what you can do, aside from confronting them or conversing with them head on, is to pray for them and ask God to help them moderate their views, because I think prayer is important. I think
I do too. Yeah.
It can moderate situations that are extreme and so forth. That's just a thought. I mean,
George Crook, you've got to have more than half of a friend who's a Trump supporter. There's got to be in your life, maybe even in your family, who kind of like him.
You know what? I got to take this call.
Okay, it's from Trump. It's from Trump. It's from Trump. It's from
George.
Trump.
George, just mute yourself, please. George.
Yeah,
Okay.
He did. He did.
Okay. Good.
I muted him.
Good.
So Ned, what are you up to?
I just came back from physical therapy. I had an opportunity that I just jumped on because I really like the guy that helps me. Stays with me, hour and a half. And so that's what I'm up to. But this is so rich what you guys are talking about just now, and this capacity that you talk about, Tim, or limited capacity because of judgmentalism and what have you. When someone asks, "What do you mean?" and "Why do you mean that?" a lot of times we're not able to articulate what we mean and why. But when you've got the kind of foundation that you have with Cursillo, it would seem to me that you trust that the fundamental teachings of Jesus are at work, and so there is a way, if you guys want to take the time and the effort and all that kind of stuff to explain and learn and understand, but because we don't have often the time to do those kinds of things, research, etc. You just trust, particularly, it seems to me with the Cursillo group, that the foundation is common, is the same. And we're just trying to find a way to live it. I don't know if that made sense, but
it does make sense. Yeah. And I regret that I did not have, and I do regret that I didn't have the courage as well as a skill, I think, to be able to kind of have the conversation, because it really developed, it created a period of several months when we were really kind of at odds with each other in the group. And because it's a men's friendship group based upon our prayer lives together, it was hard. Yeah. I'm not proud of myself for how I didn't handle it. But you just have to kind of, I think what I'll do, Ned, and maybe, I don't want to force any conversation, but maybe if it comes up, I could approach it and say, help me understand why you think that way. But one of you guys said, but most people cannot explain why they think or why they have certain opinions and attitudes. It kind of puts them, in an awkward situation. Like, why are you beating your wife so much? I mean, it's not, yeah. So I'm not sure that it would lead with the one guy in particular. I'm not sure that he would have the ability or even a desire to kind of pull out of his mind why he thinks the way he does.
Yeah, because aren't feelings involved? I think somebody sent out an article about how we don't just think, but we have feelings that determine what we do too. So I think there's more feelings involved, don't you think, too?
Oh,
Why it's difficult.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
I think.
I wonder if Benedict's deep listening includes that. It's not just listening, it's deep listening.
Mhm.
And whether or not synodality has the potential to affect the pattern of how we interact with other people, it might be helpful, not just limited to the church, but also to situations like what you're talking about, Tim.
Somebody in our group sent out a beautiful piece called Radical Listening. Anybody else watch that? And the woman talked about the disagreement. I look at this issue and I see this big ball and it's orange. You look at the same issue and you see it as blue. But with radical listening, I walk around to the other side and look through your vision, and damn, it does look blue from your side. And think about that. If we can do that kind of thing, that's I was really moved and impressed with that radical listening concept.
Yeah,
Makes
following.
sense, Tim?
Yeah, Fred, John, there was a talk at the Lonergan conference on something called, I believe it was called transcendental listening. Is that right, Fred? Elizabeth Morelli or
Yeah.
Elizabeth Murray? Could you
Yeah.
say, did she talk about what Johnny's talking about? Yeah, the talk was transcendental listening by Elizabeth Murray, who's a professor at Loyola Marymount. And what did she mean by that? Is it understandable or easy to talk about, or does it fit in with what Frank is saying?
Well, I think she's expressing in more explanatory terms what Johnny is talking about in concrete and examples.
Yeah.
And I think they're on the same beam.
Okay.
Is there a way? I know you sent out a lot of links about the conference. Is there a way to see kind of an index of things that have been posted online or podcasts and say, oh, I'd like to listen to this one? Or do you have to just kind of go through everything?
The best I know, since I'm so incompetent in this sphere, is that I think with the link, if you press on the link, it'll show you not only how to get into it if you were going to get into it, but it has a schedule. And you can go through the whatever was recorded, go to the talk you're interested in.
Okay, thanks. Thanks.
That sounds great.
Bob, how was your week?
It was good.
Was it?
We had a good, very good presentations. Dan Haran was especially impressive, and Mary Novak of Network. She is something else. Both of them are just superb. And then, John Stowe and Cardinal Turkson, they were good, but these other two, in my opinion, outshone them.
Are these available? Are these available?
They
to
will
listen
be.
to?
They're not yet,
Okay.
but they were all recorded. They have to be kind of addressed by Vic Gallagher from down in Atlanta. He does it for us every year, and they come out really well, really well.
So, Bob, what was your takeaway from the assembly, or takeaways or impressions?
Well, I think that you have these different speakers speaking from different dimensions. I'm not sure I have a single takeaway. I think supportive synodality is clear that is getting embedded in the way that the church is going to be functioning. There was no talk about Francis retiring at all. That Stowe's talk was all about Fratelli Tutti, and that he really mined that document. I can tell you that. I don't know how many of you know John Stowe. He's down in Lexington, Kentucky, Franciscan, a very, very bright guy. He's been around, and he's still youngish. I'm not sure. I would guess he's around 60 at this point. But he just had every corner of Fratelli Tutti brought out. My head was swimming. With Turkson, he was tracing the history of Vatican II and the vision of Vatican II. So what he tried to do was to go back to John the 23rd and the way it all got started. And then, so he died, of course, young, but the council went through, and then there was John or Paul VI, and then there was John Paul II, and then there was Benedict, and he kind of traced that, and I felt he was not as organized and as clear in what he was trying to say. He seemed to have a lot of papers that he had to shuffle to try to get his message, but I think he felt that this would be my takeaway, that we had lost through John Paul and Benedict, the energy and the fire of Vatican II, which was let loose in the 70s, but then got little by little packed down. But now we got Francis again, who is totally Vatican II, and he's taking a lot of steps to say we're not going backwards. We're going forward, and we need to keep going forward. So those would be, I think, the main things that I would say. There's some stuff we had about the assembly and the association, but I think it all went well. We have a couple of new members serving on the leadership team. A couple had to term off. So anyway, that was my thought. We were down at the what do they call it? Now I'm blanking the name of the place, where they teach ship people how to be captains of ships in the Maritime Institute.
The Maritime Academy?
Yeah, well, they call it an institute, so I don't know if there's another place that's an academy, but it's right there, right near BWI Airport. Wonderful place, very, very hospitable. They have kept facilities, but most especially they have a wonderful smorgasbord every meal.
And so I'm looking at Fratelli Tutti. It is one long encyclical, and so you guys who spent time in Rome and all that, who writes it? I can't believe that Francis wrote this. So who writes these things?
There's a guy. Let me see if I can find it.
Does he have a lot of scribes that he calls on, and he says, "Here's what I'm thinking about"? you guys put together some words for me to look at. I mean, does he have speech writers the way Biden and Trump did? I mean, because this thing is long, long, long.
Yeah.
And I can't imagine an 85-year-old man being able to write something like
But
that.
Tim, is it understandable? That's a better
Well,
question. Long and ununderstandable.
No, I mean, it's written for people like us, but I'm looking at it, I'm thinking there's a lot of citations, and he's talking a lot about St. Francis. I'm trying to think, okay, now come on, the guy's busy. He's got a full-time job. You know, and so who in the world puts this together? Do you guys know that? Who does it?
Yeah, first of all, he's a Jesuit. I think he has a number of fellow Jesuits and others who are available for him to work that sort of stuff up. He's got the one Jesuit who is based there in the Vatican and was head of communications and that sort of thing.
Spardo or Sparato or something.
Adaro. Antonio
Yeah,
Adaro.
I think he's one, but then the other one that I'm told, or I've kind of been informed, is a fellow Argentinian Jesuit who worked with him a lot when he was the Archbishop down there. And so I think he is credited, though he doesn't claim credit, but I think he is recognized as one of his chief writers for the things that he does. But it seems to me, you know, for those talks that he gives, and it can be 2 or 3 talks for different things that are going on, I agree with you, Tim. I think he can't write all that stuff. You know, he has meetings. He spends a lot of time when they have the Wednesday audiences, and he spends time with people. He loves to spend time with people. But I think he's quite clear in communicating his own mindset. And, you know, he's a well-educated, well-thinking man. He wrote the documents of Aparecida, and Turkson spoke a lot about that. You know, it was Bergoglio who really put that thing together and got the dynamics of the church in Central and South America. It was from Aparecida. And so, you know, I mean, he's quite able, but I agree with you. I can't imagine. And they have all the footnotes. I'm sure he's not staying up late at night and looking up footnotes.
Just site checking.
Yeah.
Oh, Amoris Laetitia, when it was published as a book, is 262 pages.
You know,
Pope Leo the 13th had 90 encyclicals, but some of them were a page and a half.
Okay.
those are better. Everybody here probably knows William Dubé, right? William Dubé.
Yeah.
And he died recently.
Mm-hmm.
And Tim, you like this, but a lot of his career was based on translating things into plain language.
Really?
Okay. Yeah. He wrote books about it. He consulted with companies, and that was really speak plainly and directly.
Right.
And it's almost like you need a second person involved. And I know, Fred, are you still here?
Yeah.
Where's Fred? I don't see his photo here.
He's there.
Okay.
Wait, Fred.
He's
got the black. He has the suspenders on. He's the guy with the suspenders.
I don't see him in my lineup here. It disappeared. Let me see. Anyway, Lonergan has a functional, you know, he divides things up into systematics is one way, and then there's a functional specialty of communications. You know, and I think often somebody needs to put out a second edition like Fratelli Tutti for Dummies or something, you know, like a 20-page version, something like that, you know, that summarizes it.
You know, I remember a couple of years ago, George and I were going to go talk with Father Lou Franz, who wanted us to call him Lou the whole time, and I couldn't. I had to.
Yeah, I just outright refused.
But what he did, what he asked us to read Amoris Laetitia, so that we could discuss it. And I tried. We had a couple of weeks at least, though, when I found out that that's what he wanted to talk about. And I couldn't get through it. He was disappointed, don't you think, George?
Yeah. You know, forgive me, I love Louis Franz and God. I just wasn't that interested in it for some reason. You know, I'm so looking forward to seeing Father Franz again. Gee.
Was he the guy that you want to see in New Orleans before he died?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
None of us knew he was dying. Not he nor us, not he nor we. It's a tragedy.
That
From Marion, yes.
the English point that you make, a translation or a language point, you'll find that in prayers of the faithful. I find that many times the prayers of the faithful have a beautiful sentiment encased in horrible English.
Yeah.
Repetition that you will enjoy life forever with God in heaven for all time. I used to have an old editor of the local paper here in Duxbury, Massachusetts. I used to visit with him. We were friends, and he wrote a little book on English, somewhat like Strunk and White, if you remember that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And he used to say to me, Frank, the enemy of the noun is the adjective. And then he would say, why would you call someone a no good drunken bum when you could call him a sot? So you're right, George, in terms of language and communication, especially with translations involved.
Yeah.
I bet that was, Frank, I bet that was a good friendship. It sounds to me like that'd be the kind of guy you'd enjoy.
Go in and sit with me.
Bob, let me ask you just a question I've had about Francis, and my half a Trump supporter friend, I thought of two and a half more while I was taking.
Oh, okay.
But anyway, has really wondered this. What was with Francis and this going into this Amazon Synod with these likenesses of indigenous peoples, fantasies of river goddesses or whatever it was. I mean, what was he trying to accomplish? What did he accomplish? Because, my Western mind, it's just, I spent almost no time on it. It flashed by me and I said, well, that was weird. And then I realized it was a big cause celeb to the Francis opponents.
All right. Yeah.
Well, my summary would be that he has a profound sense of the cultures of different people, different cultures of people who are very much into Catholic faith, but they have their own way of expressing it. They have their own way of celebrating it, what it's all about. And so, the kind of folks that got very, very upset, and there was some guy from Austria, I think, that stole the Pachamama and threw it into the Tiber River. Right. Happily, they recovered it because he thought it was, it was not Christian, much less Catholic. Which is a very narrow mindset, and it's kind of the traditionalist mindset. And the traditionalist sees things as it's all about, if you want, white Catholicism. If it's Europe based, and then they had to take the same kind of churches to Vietnam and to China and to wherever they went. Which didn't fit the culture of the people that they were trying to help to come to understand and have a sense of God, a relationship with God. But once they got the message, then they would express it in their own colorful manner, and their dance and their music and their language, and all that sort of thing. And so it's the hardliners that say this is, this is barbaric or whatever other bad terms you can use. So I think that, Francis is very much at home with that.
Yeah, that
It
guy
kind of,
who threw it into the Tiber was a founder with an ally of a very right-wing political party in Austria.
Oh, okay.
So, there's this whole tie-in again in terms of, he's a young man in his 20s who did that. Schlugel, I think is his name. And he's kind of a cause celeb among the right here. So,
I
Can
can't
you
help.
imagine? Can you imagine if, along the topic that Bob's talking about, let's say that the successor to Francis comes out of Africa or comes out of a third world country. I mean,
Yeah.
Manila.
Can you imagine what the white European American church's reaction would be to a black dude from Nigeria, running the? I mean, I think probably you would see even more of what Bob is referring to, kind of appreciating the local cultures and the different manner in which we celebrate God and Jesus. I think that people would have a shit fit.
Just your friends.
Oh yeah.
Maybe a half of your friends. Maybe that one half of yours, George.
George, you got your hand up.
Yeah. This brings to mind the title of a workshop. Talk about Bob, you said get into other people's customs and culture. And Fred, there was a workshop on ocean empathy. Do you remember that?
Sure.
Ocean empathy. It was about, so throwing that into the Tiber has no respect for the fish that live in the Tiber. That's kind of the sense of it, And this talk about the ocean was, I think part of it was, if you can remind me, Fred, was that you get into, you respect fish for being fish. You respect it's kind of like once I heard a revered Buddhist Lama from India who became vegetarian give a talk at UC Berkeley on vegetarianism. And he said, from the point of humans, it's okay and makes sense to kill these animals, but from the point of the cow, it does not make sense. It is not desirable. And therefore, he was espousing the Buddhists that were part of his monastery to become vegetarians. And it means getting into so this guy, Bill George, right? Is that his name?
Yeah.
I don't know, but he gave a wonderful talk about ocean empathy. But this is just a little tangent. But I think it fits in with what you're saying, Bob, about empathy with where these people are. But Fred, what are the takeaways? I thought this was a 49th Lonergan conference that Fred and Sue have put on. And to me, it's an amazing thing that in 1 week you have Bob, your organization, and Fred, the people you brought together. To me, it's a real bright spot. It was kind of like people who think about different things from different areas coming and sharing what they're doing. I was really amazed by the person that talked about his course in racism and using Toni Morrison as an example of psychic conversion. And he's teaching it, I guess, in a college. Is that right? But, and it was immensely interesting. I want to go and read all those books that he kind of cited and so forth. But in 1 week, to me, there were two very bright spots of synodality in action, not official synodality, but sharing and listening and conversation. And Fred, you started it off by talking about Sue's idea of Young Life, the Young Life movement, and how they operated, that they welcomed teenagers who were unchurched to come to a meeting, number one, and made them feel welcome. And then number two, they had great speakers to talk to them. And that's exactly what you wanted to do at Boston. And you've done it for 49 years. And all these people have gone off and they've taken what they've learned creatively, and it was there, there it was for 4 days. Anyway, what was your takeaway, Fred, of what you heard? Is it a hopeful note that you could share?
Well, to me, part of the pleasure of the thing is having people like Ben Holman, who gave that talk using Toni Morrison, that I directed his dissertation, and on the he did his dissertation in relation to the ecological, I can't remember the name of it, encyclical of
Laudato Si.
Laudato Si, yeah. And so many of them are my former students. And I'm just sitting there all aglow, listening to how they've gone their own way, and they're not singing in unison, and they're bringing up tremendous ideas and points in a way that's very, very well put together. And it just seems to me a model of, and then the question periods, where some people want to give a question as a speech, which always occurs, and also real questions leading to real discussions. And I just thought it was tremendous. It just made me so hopeful. And so, of course, a lot of that has to do with pride, my pride. But I think it's, I do think it's also for the world. And so that, and then all those different aspects you brought up, Bill George's talk on the law of the sea and empathy with the sea, and how he explained that law in that sense was ethics writ large. And he's an ethicist, and he's an example of a person who goes in his own direction from the time he was a student at the University of Chicago, and keeps pushing and pushing and pushing it. And I was very, very pleased when you told him how much you appreciated it, and how your own concerns in some sense overlap with his. I can't really say that's true of me, but I realize different strokes for different folks. And I think the workshop really does cover that in some sense, because not everybody is the same, has the same concerns.
Right.
And so it's a tribute to Lonergan, how he's relevant to all these different problematics, and there's in a very helpful way.
Yeah, I told him if I were young and going into law, I'd probably bring class action suits against countries for shooting missiles into the ocean. Where do those missiles go, and who do they hit, and what's the after effect of all this type of stuff? But with impunity, we go ahead and just treat the one ocean we have for crap, and that's what's going to happen. It's going to come back to get us.
Just the thing brought up how much the Earth is, they call it the blue planet, because so much of the Earth is really the ocean. And you come to realize it's not something just to use and enjoy, but something to care for. You don't often think about it.
Yeah, there's a very interesting article that you may have seen about Salt Lake City, the Salt Lake there kind of decreasing, and how that's going to affect migratory birds and everything, because the water level is going down, the farmers want it, et cetera. It's a very complex thing, but all the intricate interactions that are involved in that type of thing.
One thing that I'm glad you brought up what Sue contributed.
Yeah.
that idea, the analogy really between Young Life and the Lonergan workshop, namely that you would have the best possible speakers, but everyone, no matter where they stood in terms of their learning, would be comfortable because it's essentially friendly. And you don't have, like you do in so many places, squabbles. You can have disagreements and adding this, subtracting that, but it's friendly. And so this idea of friendly persuasion, I think, is a wonderful quality of the Lonergan workshop.
Yeah, maybe in case all of you don't know what Young Life is, do you have you heard of it? It's kind of a Protestant youth outreach. For example, when I first met Sue in Rome, I said, Sue, what brought you here? And she said, well, the Lord wanted me to come. Something like that. That's what Sue said. And she was a member of Young Life. And Ned in Pomona, at Pomona High School, there were some Baptist teachers there who were Baptists, and they were doing Young Life there to get sport stars, sport teams. Could you come? Are you interested in coming to a meeting at somebody's house, at 5 o'clock, and they'd have this fellowship, welcome and so forth, but then they'd have somebody talking who was interesting. And the idea was then they would become interested in Christ and so forth. So Young Life. And then my classmate, Doug Frankenbaugh, Doug Hoffman, we went to Switzerland to a Young Life camp, based on meeting Sue and learning about Young Life. And we went and met with these youth from all over Europe who were talking about Jesus as a person in their life, the Lord, and very personally, different from, the way that Catholics usually, the Lord is way out there, right? But it was like they had some personal connection and action in their life. So anyway, so I got to know about Young Life from Sue, and Malksy Fruit was a place in Switzerland, and then coming back and meeting these young Baptist people who were Young Lifers and so forth. So
let me ask you, we've got a couple of crack attorneys and priests here. Do you think that it is appropriate in America, in public high schools, for coaches, for example, to pull together guys or girls, and kind of talk about religion? Or do you think, because I know that there used to be something called the Fellowship of Christian Athletes that was very popular at the University of Georgia. I mean, it was big time. And I don't even know if those kinds of efforts can even exist anymore. I have a friend in the parish who taught math, chemistry, and he was the tennis and soccer coach. And he would get together after practice and to talk about faith issues and stuff like that. And pretty much he was told, you've got to stop doing this. Do you guys have an opinion about the role of this kind of thing in public schools? I'd be curious to know what George, Ned, what you guys think about the appropriateness of that.
Well, one of the things that I always try to bring up as quickly and simply as I can when we're talking about abortion with folks that are, really yelling and screaming about how we've got to stop, the millions of babies being killed, et cetera, is that we don't live in a theocracy. We live in a democracy that's run by constitutional standards.
In theory.
Well, yeah, there's always tension, but the fact is that you go out and you vote in various ways for the kinds of morality that we practice in the secular world, and law is really kind of the morality of America speaking about America, and the separation of church and state depends upon all kinds of definitions. What is education in a public school all about? When you talk about, Mike Malloy wrote this wonderful book on religion, religions of the world, and then he focused in on Christianity in a second book. Well, I suppose if you're in a university or college and you've got a study of religions of the world, you can have guys come in and groups talk about that, but it's more of a factual, observational understanding that's going on. When you start getting into devotion and evangelization, then you get into real trouble. And the atheist parents run up and say, "You shall not indoctrinate my kid in your values when it comes to God and religion. I don't believe in God, and so keep away from my kid." And then some other person will come out and get another variation of that. So we do have a separation of church and state. Question is, how can one talk in ways that evangelize or raise questions where either faith will be deepened or opposed?
Well, the classic First Amendment answer is don't.
Right.
If you're a coach or something, don't use your charisma, your position to evangelize. Don't even think about it.
That's right.
That's the classic, somewhat undermined separation of church and state.
NFL coach just got, it was a college coach. I can't remember his name.
No, it was that guy in Texas that was praying on the 50-yard line after high school football games.
Yeah, and he got jumped all over.
But ultimately he won, I think, didn't he? The court said,
I think the court said you couldn't fire him.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I think that,
But he didn't win. He was admonished.
Well, but don't you think he should have been?
Well, yes. When you're talking devotional evangelization, when you're that kind of a model, and you're professing in a public way on the grounds of a public school, that's just not appropriate.
Yeah. No, probably the people of that little old town think it's just peachy keen.
Well,
the Supreme Court just struck down, among other things, a law in Maine that says that because of the rural nature of the state, that the state of Maine will pay for children their tuition in private schools, but not religious schools. And the court struck that down as saying it was discriminatory against religious schools because first and foremost, they were private. So we have separation of church and state, but we don't have, there's a lot of places in this country, we don't have clarity about what that means.
I completely agree with that. Absolutely.
Yeah, well, what about when Trump was holding upside down the Bible in front of the church, Washington Square? And he represents, Ned, and like what you're saying, he represents this multicultural, multi-diverse, pluralistic society. He didn't, he should have held up like a dozen more books, like a Koran and a atheist Bible, and he should have been up there and, had people holding up all kinds of books, but he held up the Christian Bible. So that's not good.
Well,
what kind of examples?
He doesn't understand either church or state.
With all due respect to Trumpers, he is just simply, in my book, an opportunist. And
you're polluting the discussion.
To appeal to the devotional folk, the evangelicals and all that.
But George Trump got out to the John Paul II shrine the next day. So he was having somewhat of an ecumenical effort there. You know, an upside down Bible one day.
No, but Ned, I think you bring up a very important point. Our country was partly founded on that no particular religion would be privileged. Is that correct?
Right.
Something like that?
Yeah.
So Tim, I think that goes to your friends. I think they kind of think it's a Catholic country. I think that's part of it. They want it to be a Catholic country, but it's a pluralist country.
No.
That isn't true about our country. I mean, Congregational Church was the established religion in the state of Massachusetts until 1834.
Yeah.
So it is not, it's a myth.
It's a myth.
We have enshrined a separation of church and state throughout our history. That's not true.
And I think Maryland was
Only
a Catholic
Massachusetts.
colony.
There are other churches established in other states.
It's a de facto situation.
Love you all.
De jure.
Okay.
See you, Naj.
See you, Judge.
Bye, Johnny.
It seems to me that the issue is imposition of one's religious convictions, spirituality, etc. So it seems to me, if you think about that coach, I mean, he didn't insist on his whole team coming out, and if you don't come out and join me in this prayer and kneel down with me and all that sort of stuff, it seems to me that's totally inappropriate. But for him to expressing it and giving, say, the students that are on his team, once practice is over and all the rest of it, if any of you would like to stay and have a chat about God or with me, you want to know more about me and where do I come from, it seems to me they should be able to do that. If it's imposed,
sort of.
Yeah.
Sort of.
I mean, it's imposed even if it's not imposed. Bob, I think.
Yeah,
if he's imposing it, then he needs to be called out. I agree with that.
No, but even if he's not doing anything overtly impositional, how's that, Frank, for a quick grammatical recovery? But anyway, but it's like, okay, boys and girls, we're gonna have a moment of silence now. If you want to pray, you may. Well,
but if you don't want to, if you want to keep shouting,
yeah.
If you want to play on my team, you're going to have to kneel down, etc.
Or if you want to be like me, you want to have a relationship with God.
Sure. Or if 18 of your teammates go and do that, but you're one of two that don't, you kind of feel like you're on the outside, right?
Yeah.
You might not get put in as much or whatever. Yeah.
Oh, that would be wrong. That would be wrong. I don't know if you're watching the football players, the baseball players, and there's all kinds of them that are making the sign of the cross.
Yes.
When they when they get a hit or they hit a home run or whatever it is, it struck the guy out.
Yeah, before the football punter punts or is after a
but it's very much
itself and goes on. And what if some guys start yelling and saying, "Hey, that's an insult to me because I don't believe in that crap,"
Well, but see, that's not state action, though.
Exactly. But you have
baseball is a business.
Yeah. It is. There are so many. I think Frank's absolutely right. There are so many gray areas and not so gray areas where people being told that you can't have a Junipero Serra in front of a public school in Santa Barbara. Well, wait a minute, he was a founder. No, he's a religious figure. We can't promote that here in a public. It just goes crazy.
Or the Sanctuary Hall in
the Capitol.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to run, guys.
What time is it?
I don't know.
8 minutes after 12.
It's
Probably
fast forward.
need to.
So I'll end
Okay,
with a
Mike.
prayer. How's that?
You end with a prayer, George.
God
Draw
bless
all
us,
together.
everyone. That's it.
Amen.
Okay,
Amen.
thank you.
Amen. The great
Thanks,
amen.
Wonderful.
So,
See you
God
guys
bless
next
all.
week.
Have a
Okay.
good. See you next week.
Hey, George, quick, go meet some